everybody. Thanks for coming. Tonight, we're talking about how to store garden crops, but it might not just be garden crops that you store. I think I can think of three scenarios for you that why this would be beneficial to you. And let's see if I can get it to switch. We're going to do that at the end. One is that you might actually like to grow more winter food than you did this year. And you might be curious about what can you store? What can you store in the garden, in the freezer? So you might take notes when I say, well, here's what you can do with squash. And you go, oh, wait, I hadn't thought of that. I'm going to grow more winter squash. So you could take notes on it. And on the resource page, you can find a link to the July class, the video recording of Zoom, of our Zoom session from July, and it tells you exactly when and how and what you can plant for winter food that you would actually have in the garden. So that could be a reason that you're here tonight. You also might, let's see, want to get crops from the farmer's market. Even if you have a lot in your garden, but you don't have everything that you want, or maybe you have nothing. Maybe you have just summer food in your garden, but you're wishing for local sort of, low food miles, real food from real people. You might want to participate in the bounty that our local farmers have in our September and October farmers markets in the area. In fact, for example, Betsy Wittig, who's at the Bainbridge Farmers Market, grows peppers, and her peppers usually come in September, and they may even be into October a little bit. And she grows these fantastic peppers and garlic and potatoes and sometimes onions, I think, and shallots. So you can purchase those from her. And some years she does sort of a winter share where she'll give you like a big CSA box of storable things, foods, and then you take them all at once. So if you know how to store food from our gardens or from our local farmers, we're supporting those farmers who need that cash in the winter, frankly. And it makes a better environment, and it is a community resilience skill to support our local food producers in all these different ways. So you don't, if you're here and you're thinking, well, I don't have those things, or I don't have most of those things from my garden, you could have them next year if you want. You could buy them from local growers too. So that's how you get to that. And we're going to talk tonight about food that we might want to store in the garden, food that we might want to cellar or cold room in our garage, a little bit about drying, and a link or two for fermenting, although I'm not going to go into it in detail. And fresh frozen, which I've listed down here. And certainly you're not supposed to be reading everything on here. I just use this kind of as a graphic organizer. And definitely a little bit about preparing foods to freeze that are a little bit more labor intensive, that you can still make use of your garden, for which you can make use of your garden, and a link or two for canning too tonight. So you're going to know a lot, and I hope we share everything. You've seen this about 300,000 times if you've been here before. You can store a lot of food in your garden. Every lump all the way to the back of the picture is a growing plant that is just in suspended animation under the snow, some of them under covers and some not. So who needs a cover in my garden and who doesn't? These are my no cover plants most of the time. Salad kale or braising kale and Brussels sprouts, generally, even when it goes really cold, don't need a cover. Mosh generally doesn't. If it's going to go down to 22 degrees, maybe I'm going to throw a cover over those. I might put like a beach towel over this and a piece of plastic over the top that I sort of anchor down. Just to be sure. The reason I say that is I'm saying, well, I take a chance and it doesn't generally freeze. They can go quite cold, but I wouldn't want your heart to be broken if this is your first Brussels sprout. If it is, then you might want to make a little bit of extra effort. This is lamb's lettuce, also known as mosh or corn salad, and it's very cold hardy. It can freeze crisp and then thaw, and it's fine. These guys need a low tunnel, not always against the freeze, but often against rain. So you can get crown rot on broccoli if it gets rained on a lot. If it freezes a little bit and gets rained on, you can definitely get the crown to rot. So generally, if I have a broccoli plant that has not yet produced a head and it's just leaves, so it basically looks like this kale plant, I don't cover those, even if it's going to snow. It's the heads and anything that you would eat as the vegetable off of broccoli or cauliflower. Um, that's what I cover up. So how do I do it? Sometimes I fold up a towel and I put a salad bowl over the top when it's going, the temperature is going to drop for a week. I don't do it for the whole season personally. Maybe you do. You could cover them for the whole season, but if you think, oh, it's too much FAF, I'm not going to make tunnels for these guys, you can cover them in other ways. This is escarole. Same is true for lettuce. Escarole is much more cold hardy and slug resistant than lettuce, but it doesn't like the wet, so I put a cover over it. I make sure that I usually do use a tunnel for my escarole bed, but I don't bring the plastic down all the way to the ground because I want some airflow. And if I am going to use a tunnel, I'm going to put rocks or, I'm going to anchor it down somehow. I have more details about that later. I put a cover on bok choy. Anybody else, if you don't cover your bok choy in the winter, please tell me that because maybe I'm doing it. I don't need to. Chard, especially red chard, does freeze, so it goes to liquid. Both Johns in this meeting, John Fawcett and John McInnes, both said that their chard generally just goes to mush, right? And then it just comes back in the spring. What I usually do is when I know it's going to freeze, and we hear there's a freeze next week, you generally can either pay attention to the weather or people just tell you it's about to freeze. I actually go out and harvest a lot of it, and then I cook it and I just blanch it down and freeze it so that I can at least have part of my chard that I know I'm going to be able to eat. And it makes great winter soups and stuff. But for the rest of it, you could cover it or put a lot of leaves around the base so that base is intact and it doesn't freeze too hard. This is spinach that's adapted for the cold right here. It's called Monster. You can see why it's so big. Monster of Viroflay, or it's also called Giant Winter. And it is very cold hardy. I have seen it covered up in snow and fine. It didn't have any damage, but I'm not positive what would happen to it if we actually went to like 28 degrees instead of the snow was probably 32 and it probably insulated it. So I do have a cover ready for that if you want to go to that trouble. And these guys just get chopped leaves over the top, 5 inches of chopped leaves on winter leeks or anything that's a root, because we just don't want the tops of them to freeze solid. I don't mean the green part, I mean the actual root top in the soil. If the soil freezes down 2 inches, the parsnip's going to freeze down 2 inches usually. Does anybody have any input on this? What do you do? Do you leave anything out? John McInnes, do you leave bok choy out in the middle of winter?
Sorry, I couldn't get my own mute quick enough. I
Oh,
haven't been doing that much wintering over in the past.
oh, okay.
Now that I have my
Mm-hmm.
raised beds with the domes on it, I plan to start doing it. So I just kind of uh, would try to get everything in before the freeze starts and
Yeah,
that type of stuff in the
cool.
past. But going forward, I'm going to do a lot more of what you're
Well, I
talking
look
about.
forward to hearing about what happens. Thanks.
A couple of questions in chat.
Oh, okay. You know what? Also, forgot to mention this. Love the questions written in the chat, but you don't have to feel like you have to reply in the chat because without your voice, it's just a monologue. So you can hear how nice it is to have other people say stuff. And I really like that too. Thanks for pointing out the chat. Let's see. You squash on the plants, Jane. So, Jane, was this sweet meat squash or was it what kind of squash was it, Jane? I can't hear you, Jane. You're muted.
Pumpkin
There you go.
and various pumpkins,
Mm-hmm.
butternut. Um, I put a whole one raised bed of all squash, and I only got a few pumpkins and, well, of course, zucchini. Um,
Mhm.
but a lot of the flowers are male and not female. There's an
Right.
imbalance.
So, right. A lot, a lot of plants produce many more male flowers than they do female flowers. And especially early in the season, I hypothesize that, well, they do, in fact, make a lot of male flowers early in the season. And I think that's because it attracts bees before you put out the females. Female flowers are expensive to make because they have like ovaries inside and things like that. So you put out a bunch of male flowers and it attracts the bees and makes sure you have pollinators. And then they put out females. Females sometimes I'll have one and I don't notice. You can't, did you see any females out there? Like, and they didn't get pollinated, they just rotted?
Right. And sometimes I have taken a feather and pollinated. Um, and I
Mhm.
did that this year, and the female flowers rotted, most of them.
I wonder if, hmm,
My
and
question,
you did
the thing I
pollinate.
have in the next, the thing I have in the next chat is kind of similar. Did you
Okay.
say, Jane, that you tried to manually pollinate?
I
Did I
had,
catch you?
yes, yes,
Because I started researching that, and you get the ping pong size female, and then I went on vacation, came back, and there's like five, six of them when I left, and none of them when I came back.
right,
So,
Right,
and
they didn't
then,
get
well,
fertilized.
yeah, so they didn't get pollinated. So then I
Pollinated.
started Googling it, and oh, that's right, I've heard about manual pollination before, but I've never done it with squash. Did anybody do that?
I do it all the time.
You do it. You do it. Okay.
I do it, but I take the male flower off that has powdery pollen that I can see because I don't want yesterday's flower or one that hasn't opened up and dried out enough to produce to loosen the pollen. I want to see the pollen on the part that sticks up, and I
mhm,
peel the blossom off, the petal off without touching the
Mm-hmm.
middle, and then I
Mm-hmm.
take that male that I picked and I run it all over and get all the pollen from that male onto the female,
Mm-hmm.
because I want a lot of pollen on there to make sure it happens. But I think a lot of people had fewer females, and I wonder if it had to do with we had a slow spring with um, with sort of overcast skies and not a lot of sun, and then we had some interruption of that every once in a while. I wonder if that had anything to do with it this year.
I had quite a few. I want to say I had about 15 or so that went bad.
And they just didn't go.
They
right.
just didn't go.
Was
They
it
just,
very
yeah.
hot when they were out? Because sometimes the pollen will dry out on the flower
It
dries out
was
before it can get.
it was all. I mean, I just got back from vacation on Sunday, and
Mhm.
the five of those 15 were there before I left, and they're dried up when I got back. The others were scattered through the air, and those last five were on the rehybridized sweet meat, which were the latest ones. I
Mhm.
do have two more females on right now on those hybridized sweetmeats that I want to make sure
So
I try to
you're
get
getting
pollinated.
females and they're not taking, and Jane
Oh,
is not getting
this,
any females.
yeah, I got quite a few this year that just did not get pollinated. They
Mhm.
produced females, but just they didn't
Well,
get
in your
pollinated.
case, I would try the hand pollination where you're not using a paintbrush, but you're actually using the male flower
Hmm.
and maybe more than one male flower.
Okay.
And Jane, do you have a lot of sun? Sometimes that
Yes, I
influences
do.
females.
No, I have a lot of sun.
I'm gonna
Last
think
year, I
about
had the
this, Jane.
same. I've been in this house 3 years,
Mm-hmm.
raised beds, and not a lot of flowers. So I planted wildflower seeds around to attract more bees.
Mm-hmm.
And then I also read last year, what's the first number of the three numbers for fertilizer? Nitrogen? Is that the first?
Nitrogen. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Low in nitrogen, the plants, the soil have more male blossoms than female.
Mm-hmm.
So last year I tried blood meal sprinkled around.
Mm-hmm.
I think I got more female flowers in a few weeks after that.
Have
But
you been regularly fertilizing your your plot every year?
Yes.
And
Yes.
have you added compost every year? A little bit?
Yes. Compost, chicken manure, maple leaves. And everything else seems to do
Maple
fine, but
leaves.
I just don't get many
Okay.
female flowers pollinated.
Okay. The maple leaves, if they're decomposing and you put them in the spring, they may be taking up all the nitrogen, but
Fall.
you're you eat it in the
Fall.
fall. That's
Yes.
good. That's good. Well, I'm going to have to think about that. Yeah, I'm not sure. I have more questions though.
Okay.
I
Thank
think I'll try to generate some more questions. Okay. I blanch my chard until I just rinse it and use the rinse water and throw it. I just pull it out of the rinse water so it's wet and I throw it in a pot pan, put the lid on. 1 minute later, turn it over with my biggest pair of tongs, put the lid back on, and just whenever it's collapsed, when it looks like cooked chard, and I just make sure it all gets exposed to the steamy heat.
Okay.
So I don't use a big pot like what I do with green beans or something like that. And that
Okay.
seems to work fine for me. Oh, male and female squash blossoms. If Here, let's go somewhere else. And I'm going to just show you this.
Well, the female actually formed a little squash before they need to be pollinated. Am I not correct?
Yeah, I just wanted to show what the difference is. So underneath, they look like
Yeah,
that. That's
there you
going to
go.
be the squash. And on the inside, can you see this? The male has one point and the female often has like several lobes on the inside. So that's how that works. Let's get back here. Yeah, that's how we tell them apart. And you can always Google, there are pictures so you can get back to get another reference point. So there are various things. There's a tunnel, it's covered in plastic. There's cloth. A lot of people call it remate. It's a special cloth for crops. And there's a lot of leaves. You can also use an old bubble umbrella or a broken Rubbermaid tin. Box. I certainly wouldn't use a new one. These are drawers off of my freezer that we had to send to the dump because it was definitely a goner. You can also make these. This is remesh concrete reinforcing wire. It's not fencing in my case because I like to move them around a lot and fencing kind of bends too much. But there are various ways to make tunnels. If you'd like to see this way of making tunnels, which you can pick up very easily with one hand, even if it's twice as long as this, I can pick it up with one hand. And if I want to secure it against the wind, I just take one of those big rocks that you find everywhere around here that you garden. When you garden, you dig it up, and I put one in each corner square. And then when I want to go mess about in the bed itself, I just kick the stones out of the squares and pick it up with one hand, and then I have really easy access. So this works very well for me, but there are various ways to do it. On the resource page, there is a link to the details about this, where to get the materials, and why you might want to consider making it out of UV resistant plastic that won't disintegrate in the sun, and where to get it. And if you want the resource page for that, you email me. If you're looking at it's the March class of 2024 and you're looking at it, you'd like the resource page, then just email me. My email is in the chat. Does anybody want to tell us a few words about fabric row cover? Well, you can get fabric row cover, and it's spun poly, and it looks like tissue paper, and you can use it. It usually gives you a few degrees of protection. I find that for some of my plants, it doesn't protect them enough, so that's why I have some hoops, or I throw a broken Rubbermaid box over them or something. But it does let moisture in and out, which is nice.
I have them on my carrots. I
Oh,
have
yes.
yeah. And
Yes.
I was annoyed about that, but they're still covered. And I guess I can leave them there over the winter.
Annoying. Yeah, at some point they're going to, the flies are going to be frozen off, right? Frozen to death, I suppose.
Is it better to use straw instead of the row covers during the cold
Oh,
months?
yeah. Yeah. I think it depends on how cold it gets, but it is better to actually put chopped leaves or something really thickly over the carrots for
Okay.
the temperature. Yeah. Yeah. So this is a don't picture for how to store things in the fridge, but but it's pretty. So let's talk about how to keep your produce and stuff alive in the fridge. This creepy, creepy photo is to remind you that produce does not die after you pick it, even the leaves. Oxygen's going in and carbon dioxide, water vapor, and ethylene gas, which is that thing that makes onions sprout and apples ripen and stuff. That's coming out. And also they have the heat from just having grown in the field. So what we want to do is minimize all of that in order to preserve this food for longer. But your fridge, we want to get it cold, but your fridge is a big dehydrator. It, in the process of chilling the air, it's going to remove moisture. And then your plants, your celery that's in there is giving the moisture up, and then the fridge removes it from the air. So we have to figure out what to do about that. So here's what we can do is if you go to your pea patch, you might want to pick last and then do your, after you've done your work, rather than picking first and leaving the produce in the sun, unless it needs to dry out like onions and garlic. I put it in the fridge and it's very advisable to chill it before it gets wrapped in plastic or anything. So I go in and I put the zucchini and the cukes on the shelf. And then later I go in and open my fridge and I go, oh, I have to put those in a bag. Greens, on the other hand, we should do in cold water and then spin them dry. And you don't need a salad spinner. You can use a clean pillowcase or a gigantic piece of cloth and just spin them in your garden or out your apartment window. After they're all cold, then we can bag them. And for things that tend to go slimy, like cucumbers and zucchini, if I'm trying to make cucumbers and I want 16 of them and I have a plant and it gives me one zucchini every day or two cucumbers every day, by the time I get 16, the first two may have rotted. So what I do for that is I wrap each one in a paper towel. And you might say, oh, that is so much faff. But I literally come in, slam it in the fridge, go back after work. Oh, there's that thing. Grab a paper towel, wrap it up, shove it in the bag. So it's seconds of effort, and the paper towel helps them not to rot as quickly. So that can definitely help. If you're going to refrigerate for long term, we can take the soil off really, really gently. Some things are very easily damaged. Leave a 1/4 inch of stem on your root crops. Don't cut into the root at all. And do it, chill it, and just like you would for any other produce. And then you can perforate the bags or leave an air gap because it's going to produce a lot of gases other than just the ethylene, and it can rot itself with those gases. Excuse me. And when we have it in long-term storage, don't feel defeated if one carrot rots or the outside of a cabbage starts to get, speckles on it, or it starts to wilt, or even the root end of the cabbage. That is normal. Humans, since we've discovered agriculture, and probably before that, have stored veg and then had to cull. That's a normal part of storing veg. Just take a look at it every once in a while and go, well, that one didn't make it. So in addition to in the fridge, we can store things in the cellar. We absolutely don't need to make that a root cellar, although those are so romantic looking. Here, most root cellars flood, and root cellars are meant to be deep enough under the ground that you'll never get to freezing temps. And we don't have those freezing temps, like it's not Minnesota. So there are very specific temperatures and humidities for each crop. And I think I have a link on the resource page that gives you the temp and the humidity for every one of those. But we cannot do that. And you should not worry about that. Because And a crop that lasts 8 months at 33 degrees is still probably going to last 4 months if it's even warmer. And an example of that is sweetmeat squash are supposed to be stored at about 60 degrees, but not below 50, and 90 to 95% humidity. I think that's them. I do not have that. They sit in my garage for the whole summer, at which point they're in the 70s, and the whole winter, at which point they're in the 40s some days. And our humidity is about 80 to 85% in the fall and winter. But this sweetmeat squash right here was picked last October, and it's fine. Even though it says sweetmeat lasts for 6 months, sweetmeat come in from the garden blue and then they turn yellow. And this is in great shape. I do watch the squash because I'll see one and it gets like a bad spot. And then I think, oh, that's the squash I have to eat this month. So I just, please don't think you have to do something elaborate in order to store them. You can store long storing varieties. So there's a link to the sweetmeat variety seeds if you want them on the page. We can leave them on the vine for a long time so that they get as firm as possible. And then they say the rind should not be, you can't cut it with your thumbnail. I have really strong thumbnails. I could cut probably a piece of leather with these things, but they just mean it's hard to do it. It's not like the outside of a zucchini, so it should be hard. You know what the outside of a squash should feel like, I think, from the grocery store. And then we cure them. Some of them need curing. We want them dry and cool. So I'm going to scroll down. If that makes you queasy, do look away. Let's see if I can get rid of this. Okay, so here's a chart that's linked, and it shows different varieties, how long they usually store. And sweetmeat is one of these down here, but they always say it stores for 6 months, but it can actually go longer. And this pale part is how long you have to cure it. Cure it means take it into your house and leave it there. So you want it on, maybe put it on a towel somewhere and leave it there so it dries out in room temperature inside the house temps. So this, if you have an acorn squash and it never tastes good straight off the vine, it might be the kind that wants to be cured for a while. If it does taste great straight off the vine and then it starts tasting bad after, in month 5, it's possible that it's just been kept too long. So it seems kind of complicated, but just I would say for quite a few of them, people will pick them and they're so pretty, they put them on the porch. That's not a place to cure a squash. So and some can get damaged under 50 degrees. So inside your house is a great place to do it. Also, it's super cute. So those are some squash curing at my house. All of these stripy ones are Styrian pumpkins. They are where the little green pumpkin seeds come from that is in your gorp or granola. Except Styrian ones are even better than the stuff in the granola. They are really delicious. It's kind of a novelty because you only get 2 per plant, and it's a semi-vining plant, so it's like a bush, and then it grows off to the side a little bit. And you get about a cup, I think, out of each pumpkin. So it is not, it's not going to give you pounds and pounds, but it's pretty fun. Oh, okay. Let's do this. See how these are 5-sided or 6-sided? A pumpkin stem, it's really hard and feels like wood. Don't pull the stems off of anything if you're going to store it. But these you can leave pretty long. Do you see that these are cylindrical, these 2 blue squash? These are sweetmeats. They're related to Hubbards and cabochas. This variety, if it has a circular rather than a 5-sided or 6-sided stem, these are juicy stems. They're pretty fleshy. So we cut them 1/2 to 3/4 inches long because we want this little tiny stub to dry out super fast. Otherwise, it will rot, and that will rot the squash right here. So what we do for the squash, let's go, is that's not right. We'll go up to squash. You can wipe them down with a 10% bleach solution right around, especially the base of the stem and underneath and wherever they sat on the ground, but really all over the squash. That's pretty everywhere, right? Pretty much everywhere. And I think said they needed higher humidity than they do. They don't really. My garage humidity for me turns out to be great. And 55 to 65 is ideal, but as I said, we can't always store them at that temp. So we do what we can and they store pretty long. Also, 55 to 65 is our fall and into winter temp in a lot of people's garages. You've got a slab floor. Often we have, it's a built over garage, so maybe it's insulated some more. And you can move it if it's going to get really cold and you know that the outer wall of your garage freezes, you can just grab those pumpkins and move them closer to the house wall. And if you have that space, that kind of space. Let's see what else we got here.
Carol, after you do the bleach, do you rinse them down after that and dry them off, or do you just?
No, I just have it on a cloth, 10% solution on a cloth, and I just wipe it. I don't, it's a very thin. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Are you concerned it'll get in there?
Well, I was just curious. And then the other question I had, I know when I pickle cucumbers, I always make sure the blossom end is completely released, and I kind of pick at the blossoms. That's something I do with squash too. Is that a good idea?
Oh, for sure. If there's a blossom on the squash or any debris.
Yeah, sometimes there's a little residual piece of blossom. And I know in pickling, that's a cardinal sin to leave those in when you pickle.
Yeah, that's because of an enzyme that makes them squishy. But they're not the squash. I wouldn't pull anything off that might make a hole in the outer part of the squash. Do you know what I mean? Right. If you can pull it off and it comes off like a dry leaf.
Yeah, I just kind of pick it a little bit just to knock it off type of thing, just to get it off there. But yeah. I don't know if it helps or not. But as long as you don't see any
fresh flesh under there. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Okay. So for potatoes, you can find long storing varieties. Check this out. This is a link also. This is a table that is sortable. It's not sortable in multiple ways. So I'm just going to choose to have storage be really great. And look, I now have sorted it. So all of the excellent storage varieties are at the top. And then you can look for whether you want them to be, dry and flowery or moist and firm. And you can choose those. So that's kind of a fun thing to look around at. You can dig them fairly late. If the plants fall over in July, you can leave them in there and don't water them. And I and other local farmers find that they last under the ground for a really long time. In fact, some people leave them over winter. I don't, because they can carry diseases of tomatoes. But when I do dig them, I let them dry completely. I don't rub them. I don't rub the soil off of them unless there's a big chunk and I want to just gently nudge it off, because the skin needs to cure so it's tough. Because on a really new potato, like a spring potato, you can push the skin off with your thumb. And then ideally, we're going to cure them in the dark, but in an airy place, 45 to 60 degrees. So you know what I do? I put them in the garage. And then we're going to store them. They would love to be between 40 and 55 with quite a lot of humidity, more than the squash. This humidity is appropriate for the potatoes, and it's not for the squash, I should say. So they would like higher humidity than we have in the winter, but our winter humidity is still 80 to 85%. It's pretty darn good. So what I do is I went to the grocery store and I said, you got any shallow fruit boxes? Like sometimes peaches come in a really shallow box. And I do one layer of potatoes and I put another box on, and another layer of potatoes and another box. I do that because it's really easy to lift a box and then look for any potato that's gone bad. And also they're not sitting against each other, sweating on each other. So I find that they last longer that way. But I also want them to be put in the dark. So I have, I reached to my right in the garage and I had a piece of black plastic. I think it was a contractor bag, and I just put it over so that it goes down on all the sides. And I don't tuck it in and make it tight because I don't want it to be really watertight and sweaty in there. I just want it to be dark and retain some of the moisture. That works really well for me. Some people do perforated bags. Some people put it in a little fridge and they set that fridge at like 45 degrees, which is not appropriate for any other, like if you were going to store meat in there, that's not going to work, right? It's not really a safe temperature for a lot of foods. But for produce, we can store it that way. Don't store it with fruit because that can make it sprout and rot and things like that. And when they sprout in the spring, as long as nothing's green potato, you're not supposed to eat. You can, if nothing's green, then you can take the sprouts off and keep eating them. How do you store potatoes? Somebody tell me how you store potatoes that you found is productive.
I use paper bags with a laundry clip on the top of them.
Awesome. And do you pretty much fill the paper bag, or do you do like a little bit?
No, not full. But I don't worry about them touching each other. Last year we had fingerlings, we had red potatoes, we had Yukon Golds. Each variety goes in its own bag. That's just so it's easier to choose.
For sure. Yeah.
And then as far as
a lot of people,
as far as curing them, we spread them out in the garage on a large piece of brown paper. We do the same thing with the garlic. We just lay it down on the floor of the garage with a fan blowing on it on low. Yeah. And then I take a dry paintbrush and just gently brush the dirt off them before I store them.
Yes. Once they get dry, it comes off much more easily, right? Like completely dry.
I think we got four or
Debbie,
5 months out of them.
That's great. That's really great. Yeah, a lot of people don't do that. A lot of people let their potatoes touch each other when they're storing them. But I like to store them until they sprout in the spring. So I'm a little bit more careful. I shouldn't say careful, a little more picky. I don't know what it is, persnickety. Debbie, you have a root cellar. Yeah, are you successful, Debbie, at keeping squash without having them rot when you just put them straight into the root cellar? Or are you talking about potatoes?
Sorry, it's my first year to use my root cellar, so nothing's in there yet.
Okay. I would cure
I've
all
had
the
it for
squash
about
first.
25 years, but I haven't used it.
Cool. That's fun. How fun to have this new toy. I would cure outside of the root cellar first. But when we're curing potatoes, we do not want any sun on them because they could go green, right?
Right. Okay.
So do you have anywhere that's like you can keep them in the dark?
All right. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Garlic. There are some varieties that store longer than others. Soft neck on the left, those store longer. They're hotter. They rot less easily. And I found that they don't sprout as much. I'm not super experienced with all the different soft necks, but my hard necks sprout before my soft necks do. And they're generally, soft necks are known to be less prone to sprouting. If your garlic gets cold, I think it's below 40 or 45 degrees. So if you're storing it in the garage and it gets cold and then it warms up again, that stimulates sprouting. I have found that it did not do so in my soft necks, but it does make my hard necks sprout. I know that's going to happen though. So in the early spring, February or so, I take my hard necks, whatever's remaining, and I take the cloves apart, separate them from each other, and throw them in a bag and put them in the freezer. And then I have them available. You can also peel them before you do that. A hard neck is the kind that makes a flower stem that comes up. It's called a scape. So that's what a hardneck is called. What else do we know about garlic?
And you can't
There's a
braid
link.
hardneck.
Yes, you can't braid them, which is irritating. I think of you every time I'm trying to figure out how to dry my hardnecks. So you probably already harvested your garlic. You harvest them when they have 5 to 6 green leaves left, and you immediately strip off the dry leaves and the outermost green leaf, and it makes a clean head of garlic without dirt on it. So you're not fighting with that in the middle of winter on your cutting board, trying to keep the grit off. And then you want to totally air dry it all the way to the very middle of the stem or the leaves before you cut it. Because if it's moist in there, then you can get bacteria going in there. And this is what it likes to do. Oh yeah, below 50 degrees means it's likely to sprout later. But sometimes we can't do that. Onions, you can get very long storing varieties. Sweet onions don't store well. So we want storage varieties, and there are 2. One is called Newburgh and one is called Patterson. These are Pattersons. They make a really big onion. And Newburgh is a dehybridized variety bred in the Northwest, I think, that is very similar. And if they've flowered, it's called bolting. If a flower has come up, they'll have a hard stem in the middle, fairly rigid. You're going to eat those first. They say they don't keep if they have that, but Pattersons that have bolted, in my experience, keep amazingly well. I'll have bolted Pattersons that are still fine and have not spoiled like 8 months later. You want a ventilated, dry, warm shade for onions, not after you've left them in the sun in the bed for a few days, then take them in the shade and let them dry all the way. And it can take weeks to months for them to dry all the way through their leaf bases because there are a lot of leaves on those puppies. And then they would like it dry and cool. So quite dry. And there are lots of ways that people do it. Does Barrett braid your onions also, John Fawcett?
We've never grown onions.
Oh, but your garlic is in cool braids. Do you have one you can show us?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Let me know when you've got it and we'll come back to you. Yeah, and you don't store onions with fruit or potatoes or other root crops that emit moisture.
Hang on, I got to get the focal point here just right.
Okay.
There we go. You can see some of it. It's red garlic.
I have to find you.
Sorry. Okay.
Oh, it's gorgeous.
Yeah.
Barrett does these braids. That's so cool. That's really, really neat.
They're gorgeous.
So that's how you store it.
Mm-hmm.
And you just have it hanging. Right.
Yeah.
Quite often people who have
we store it we started out the same way as we do with the potatoes. It goes on the brown paper with a fan, and then we leave it it's in the shade. It's not direct sunlight or anything in the garage, and it just until it gets dry enough to braid, and then we braid it and
that's
then hang
interesting.
it up.
I never use a fan, and I have to wait a long time. So that I should try that.
I figured it's an evaporation process, so if you can move the air across
for sure,
it'll go faster.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So here are all sorts of ways. John's braids are one of the ways to not let the mice get them because you can hang them up. So I have some wire shelving that's quite successful. Wire shelving next to something that the mice can climb is not successful, but as long as it has, a little plenty of space around it or it's next to unclimbable stuff. I've got one of these. It seems quite successful for me to keep things in the top of one of these. I don't put it in the bottom because I know that the mice could get it. These metal cabinets show up on Craigslist all the time. You could drill like ventilation holes across the top. I don't know. I don't have experience, but I'm curious about them. And then this is just my garlic and some little shallots drying on a piece of bamboo hung across my porch which is my potting shed. End of my porch is my potting shed. And it only recently, a couple of years ago, occurred to me that these are probably specifically made to keep mice away because they hang from the kitchen ceiling in a lot of old houses, old European houses. And we can talk freezing too. Let's see. I'm looking at oh, thanks for putting those links in, John. So we can freeze them. A lot of veg needs to be blanched first, and you can find exactly how to blanch stuff right here and how long to do it. For every vegetable, it'll tell you how long, and it'll tell you if your water that you put the vegetables in takes more than 1 minute to come back to a boil, you should use more hot water or less veg, because you want it to come back up. And then, like for green beans, you boil them for 3 minutes and then you throw them into cold water. And then you drain them off a little bit and spread them out like that. And you have green beans to put in minestrone soup all winter long. And it's really great, especially if the green bean bomb is going off, which it has done for many people. So does anybody have other ways that you store things? I bag them or put them in a bin. Does anybody have other ways that you store frozen foods? I think that was not a great question, so I don't think I'll get many answers. For greens and prepared stuff like pesto, I have a stainless steel cupcake pan. I wouldn't use a non-stainless steel one, like a plain steel, because I think it might rust a little bit, but you could use a silicone one. And the reason I like this is after I wilt the chard, I just grab it and, I let it cool off on like a sheet pan or something. And then I grab it in its sort of very drippy state and I smash it gently, but it is compressed into this. And it makes pucks, which I call them pucks. It takes the air out of it, so it doesn't take up much space. And also not having the air in there, if I had just kale leaves that I'd frozen and then smashed into a bag, they would crumble, but also they have so much air around them, it tends to get freezer burnt more, but this reduces freezer burn. And if you do it with something like a prepared food like pesto, it will fit into this kind of a jar. They're straight up and down. They have no shoulders sticking out like a mayonnaise jar would or a typical quart jar. But this is just the perfect size for those to go in there if you wanted to store them not in plastic, but in glass. I put anything fatty in glass because I have a probably erroneous idea that it's better not to store fatty stuff in plastic. But that's not an official thing, but it's just, I like to have it in the jars. Why would you want to freeze pesto? Why would you want to freeze stuff like that? Well, maybe you had a lot of fun planting basil and now you have 50 basil plants in your yard that are producing and you're thinking, I can't give it away fast enough and it's turning black. Why not make yourself some delightful stuff for winter? But also, it will save you more time than plain frozen veg because you've made all your pesto for the winter all at once. You can put on anything. It helps you for busy families who want to be able to make a meal really fast because your kids have 45 minutes before they go off to swim practice and math tutoring. And so if you can do that, if I can do that because I have some cooked onions and some pesto and some frozen green beans and whatever else I can throw in, I could make a soup, right? I could make some stuff really fast. It's like shocking how fast you can make it. So it's great for the busy families. It's great for singles or pairs who want to make sure that they don't just default to the easy thing every night, because that's what I would do. I sometimes do that. So I have to make sure that I have interesting ways to zhuzh up the veg that I do want to eat. And also, if I have some red pepper pesto and some eggplant stuff and some basil and some cilantro chutney, I'm eating those herbs, I'm eating those colorful anthocyanins, and I'm eating more veg because I'm putting those on veg that are continue to be interesting for me. And also, it was really great when we were raising our kid who was not a natural veg eater to model over and over and over again that we eat this wide variety. We do eat sauce that's green. We do eat sauce that's orange. We do eat these vegetables. These are salty and delicious because they have this coating on them. So that was really great. And it did in the long run work out, even though we had to model for a really long time. But it's a pretty cool thing so that we don't fall into the habit of it's steamed broccoli, bag of miscellaneous vegetables, or a salad. That happens a lot. That's those are the easy ones to do. Anyway, so I wasn't showing my kid, those are the three things that we eat, which is a real challenge. So it's really nice to have the other stuff so you can just keep modeling that. So this is literally looking down in my freezer. It has a drawer, and that's stuff that's in there in those jars that I showed you, those straight up and down jars. I'm not sure what's next here. Oh, what can you do? So here are my ideas, but maybe you have other ideas. So definitely, oh my gosh, Debbie, thank you. Okay, so I've got some ideas on here, but Debbie says, oh, there's so much on here. I have to read the comments now. Debbie says she spreads berries on parchment pan to freeze and then bag them frozen. Yes, that's individually quick freezing. Yes, because they freeze faster and they're better quality, right? And John says, love the parchment for no stick pouring. Oh, they pour the berries. Yeah, you just pick up the parchment and pour it in. Ratatouille. Debbie, do you make ratatouille and freeze it? Oh, you do? Cool. Yeah, that's great if you get some eggplants. So ratatouille could go on here on this list. So pesto base, I mentioned a while ago, I think. I don't put all the oil in it. I put enough to make it seem like a thick pesto and to kind of protect the herbs. But I don't want to freeze a large quantity of olive oil in my freezer because I always have that in the cupboard. And I also don't want to freeze the Parmesan because I have that in my fridge and it keeps. So I put everything else for the pesto, the pine nuts, some of the oil, all of the basil, and all of the garlic in it, and then buzz that and then make little pucks out of it. And then that is fantastic on minestrone soup. It's like how to make vegetarian minestrone soup. Tastes fantastic. It's put pesto in it. Yeah, you can make all kinds of things. Mint cilantro chutney. If you have a mint plant, you're wondering what to do with it. You can definitely make mint cilantro chutney, which is the green stuff that you get in some Indian restaurants around here. You just Google a recipe. And also, if you're going to long cook something, if you ever caramelize an onion or saute onions in a year, like anytime, why not do 12 of them? Because you have a bunch of onions and they're going to bolt. And why not do them all at once? And then it's like this kind of a celebration, like, haha, I'm getting ahead of things and I'm doing this really cool thing. And then you freeze them in little bits, and then you can put them on your burgers or on a pizza with blue cheese and all kinds of deliciousness. So it's pretty great. So you were nodding there, John Fawcett. Do you caramelize onions all at once?
Well, we save a lot of things in ice cube trays. Pesto is one of them. I don't put the cheese in. It's the garlic, the pesto, the oil. And when pine nuts go sky high, I use pumpkin seeds. They're creamier. It changes the flavor profile ever so fun, but they're really nice with it. And then we also use, I'm going to make a phrase. I'm going to say a phrase here that some people won't be familiar with. Leftover wine. A friend of mine asked me, what is that? So we're not, I don't drink, and Barrett drinks very little. So if we open a bottle of red, sometimes it'll sit there on the counter for a long time. We pour the leftover red into ice cube trays, and it will actually freeze, and we can throw it into pasta sauces. Works great.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. Yes. Or you'll read some neat thing that says deglaze with a tablespoon of red wine, and you think, okay, that's a commitment. That's great. Lovely. So Debbie C, it's best this time of year. Ratatouille is best this time of year for sure. You have the peppers, you have the eggplants. I have actually done that. I lost my eggplants this year, but I would be making ratatouille right with you. This picture is sweetmeat squash chunked into 4 to 5 inch chunks. And the reason it's on here is when you crack this baby open, this isn't even a big one, and you make roasted squash out of this much of it, and then you make soup out of that much, you still have a lot of squash left, and you have to figure out what to do with it before it starts molding in the fridge. So I roast it like that, and see, it takes a long time at 375, like definitely over an hour, maybe even an hour and a half. But I want it to be like syrupy, oozing syrup and really brown. And then I gorge on it for several days. But another thing I do with it is I take this ice cream scoop and I scoop level scoops of it straight off of the skin and freeze it. And that roasty, toasty squash is amazing in a very quick to make squash soup in the winter. So I made some in like 10 minutes because I already had orange juice and curry powder, and I just sizzled it, and then I poured it in the squash and some veg broth in like 10 minutes. And my mother-in-law was like, this didn't take hours. Well, it sort of did, right, to roast the squash. But I am not going to make any recipe at night that begins roast a squash, right? I'm just going, not doing that. We're not doing that recipe. So I do it ahead of time. And also, these are quarter cup measures. And I have a lot of bread, like cornbread and gingerbread recipes and things like that call for squash. You can look them up, or we might put them in a recipe collection. I'll show you that in a few minutes. And I use those, and you just thaw them and then make the stuff. And my child had a lot more squash in their life than they might have known because of that. And we had also, I would make a really quick like crustless pumpkin pie, which is delish. We called it cinnamon pudding at the time. So I advocate that. What are your other clever ways of storing stuff? Is there anything else that you roast before you store it?
I've roasted quite a bit of squash. Some varieties, and I can't tell which. I'm thinking butternut tends to crust over pretty hard and then dry out. And I'm trying to remember which varieties. So, and I think so. I kind of stopped doing an open like you've done them there, and I tend to do them with in a Dutch oven with the lid kind of part way on, if you will, to get a little bit of the caramelization, but not all of it. But I want to say butternut tends to crust over and dry out. But well,
maybe you wouldn't like this, but I don't think it's very. I mean, it's a little bit dry. You can see, right?
No, that looks good. That looks really good. What you've got there, that's not what I'm talking. What I'm talking about is like, do I throw this out, or do I try to feed it to the dogs, or do I
a lot of instructions? Yeah, a lot of instructions have you basically steam it in the oven like you're doing.
Yeah, so I tend to freeze it in half pint or 1.5 pint containers to use it. I haven't thought about doing scoop type thing like you're talking about there. That's
maybe you only need it for that. You're not making recipes that say you need 2 cups of it, and you have. I mean, if you know your recipe needs 2 cups and you have a pint, then you're in good shape, right?
Yeah, when I'm doing squash soup, I tend to do it in batches and then freeze them again in pint glass jars which is a perfect thing for lunch type of thing. So I tend to do a lot of that. On the pesto, I do exactly what you did. I took your idea when I saw it last year, although kicking myself for I didn't ask Carol what she uses to get that size that fits in this wide lid deal. And so I used custard cups, and I had to trim them off with a paring knife or whatever. But I see your idea with cupcake deals. So now I'll do that this year. So
works for me. How fun. Well, great. That's cool. What's really satisfying to me is hearing all the ways that we're already storing everything, which I think is really neat. And you could do this with produce that you bought from our local farmers, or you could make notes and grow it next year. Doesn't that look, especially the one on the right hand side, looks like some kind of foodie influencer made that? It's not, it's me. It's super easy. This is the same cake on the left and the right. And right now we are having an Italian plum bomb going off. They're the less juicy ones that you can break open with your fingers, and the pit does not stick, and they're not sour next to the pit. They're just lovely, and they're all over the island right now. You can make these, and I have recipes in the resource page. Actually, it's 2 recipes, but I use the American Test Kitchen recipe, and this one and this one are the same cake. It's just that I took a pear off my neighbor's tree and made this one. The cool thing about these in terms of storage is they're about an inch tall. That's all they are. And you quickly freeze them in your freezer. You can make 3 or 4 of them, freeze them fast, cover them up in parchment paper, wrap them in foil, or maybe you could even just put them in a zip bag, a freezer zip bag. I don't know. But once they're frozen hard, you can stack them like dishes in your freezer, or maybe even set them on edge and keep them all winter. And then you can say to someone who happens to be, if there's somebody who's in your apartment building or something, hey, do you want some plum cake? And you can like have guests over and have this, or you can spontaneously celebrate. You can give it out to a neighbor or something like that. So it's a great way to preserve those plums, and it is not too sweet. It's just delish. I love it. And there are 2 recipes. One's the original, and then one's the America's Test Kitchen Slight Improvement. So I use the Slight Improvement one because I like to make things hard. Yeah, but that's really great. Do you, John, you guys dry your Italian plums, right? John Fawcett.
Yes, we split them, pit them, put them in the dehydrator for 24 hours, leave them with just enough moisture so they're a tasty, tasty little snack. And there's a Silver Palette cookbook for chicken Marabella. And we made it vegetarian with cauliflower the other night. And it was absolutely amazing. And we used our plums for the prunes in there, our dried plums.
Oh, that's great. That's really neat. Maybe you can put that recipe in when we have a recipe file later.
I will share that recipe with you guys because it was delicious. Sweet. It served over mashed potato, and most of the ingredients we were able to pull from our garden to make it.
Isn't that fun? Really neat. Debbie C, you got half a case of lemons. I love that about you. And then you froze them. Yeah, froze them as ice cubes, right? That's really nice. I've got Meyer lemon ice cubes in my freezer. I'm going to skip that one. We're going to figure out how to use them, but not this minute. So talking of drying things, you do not have to adopt the dehydrator lifestyle and buy yourself a big dehydrator. You could dabble first to see if you like it. So these pictures represent 4 recipes. One is to dry apples. I would say anything you're drying, should oil the racks, in my experience. Maybe you disagree, but these guys, if you dry them to crisp, which I really love, I love to dry them to absolutely crisp and quickly jar them up so that they remain crisp in small portions. If you do that and you get them crisp on a unoiled rack, they don't come off without shattering. So let's see what else we can come up with here just for a sec. Okay, so let's see. I'm going to talk about these first. There is on the resource page, there's a recipe for beet chips. And you salt them and leave them for a little while so they get a lot of flavor. It kind of pumps the flavor up. You can do the same recipe with parsnips. I don't like the core of a parsnip. I think it tastes like soap. So I actually slice mine, the fat part lengthwise, and then I do the skinny part separately. And as soon as I come to the core, as I'm slicing away at it, I rotate it and just continue on all four sides so I don't have to eat the core personally if you don't like that. But they are yummy. They will not turn bad tasting veg into good veg because they intensify whatever the flavor was in the first place. But these are yummy first forays into dehydrating. When you are testing anything, if you want it crisp, you need to reach into your oven and take one out and wave it around until it comes to room temp, because a hot thing is going to bend anyway. So you want to make sure if you're looking for it to be crispy, then you want it at room temp. A lot of people do apples just until they're leathery, so you don't have to do that. But I think they're all fun. So let's look. Okay, so if you're going to do the parsnips or the beet chips, it's really nice if you can get them a 1/16 of an inch thick. You can try it with a knife. You can get it thinner with a veg peeler. You're going to have more like tissue-like material, and they'll be more shatteringly fragile. But if you can get it to 1/16 of an inch thick, it's nice to have a mandolin to do that. And I have a link in the resource page to mandolins, the favorite mandolins from Cook's Illustrated. It's nice if you find one in a thrift store, if you don't want to spend your $60 on a mandolin. Take it out of the box and make sure that it doesn't have some of them have settings, like 1 inch, 1/2 inch, 1/4 inch. You want it to go really, really thin. So it's ideal if it's a continuous adjustment, like you just turn a screw and it gets thinner and thinner and thinner. The Cook's Illustrated favorite is in thrift stores sometimes, and there are a lot of mandolins in thrift stores. Definitely have recipes for you. And I think I do jar them up, especially the apple chips. I jar them in either a pint jar. They fit quite nicely in a pint jar once they've shrunken. And it works very well if you have a puffy apple. You know those ones that don't last that long? They're not smushy, but they aren't very hard when you eat them fresh. And they tend to not store super well. They dry really well. A puffy apple is a very good dryer. And it's almost a different flavor when they're crisp. So I have used Talenti jars because then I can mail them to relatives for Christmas. And your neighbors are all eating Talenti and they want something to do with their jars. So I cool them. I make sure they're crisp by waving one around. But then I cool it. And as soon as it's cool, I stuff them into jars and seal it really hard, because ideally I don't want those to get soggy, and they will get, things that are crisp will get soggy. Vegetables that are crisp will get soggy sitting out. Okay, so this is most of what I just said. I will give you a link that explains why and how much to use of crushed up vitamin C tablets, or fruit fresh probably, or ascorbic acid that you can use. If you have one of these guys, these show up in thrift stores a lot too. This is the peeler blade. My peeler blade doesn't work very well, so I end up quickly peeling the apples and shoving them in here, and it slices them into perfect slices and cuts out the core. So they're pretty nice, these guys. And if you get it at the thrift store, then you just use it for 3 years and you decide you're not doing that anymore, and you just give it back to the thrift store. Yeah. So when you seal anything into when you're done drying something, if it's crisp, you know you've got it dry enough. But a lot of things you don't want crisp. A lot of people like sort of a chewy apple, or you don't want a crisp prune, right? What you do to make sure you've got it dry enough is you seal it into a jar and you leave it for 2 days. And if there's no condensation in the jar, then you're fine. And if there is condensation, you need to take it out and dry it out a little bit more. Does anybody have other advice about drying? Drying stuff? Okay. Anything else? Oh, well, you can have a dehydrator if you want. That's a fancy dehydrator with metal shelves and all that. That came off of Craigslist. And there are a lot of dehydrators on Craigslist. Sometimes there are none, and then sometimes there are 2, and sometimes there are 12. So you can keep an eye out. But this is just a page off of Craigslist when I typed in dehydrator recently. So they are findable. And you're going to want to know about this no matter how you want to preserve. National Center for Home Food Preservation. And they tell you how to safely do anything. And they have recipes for salsa, recipes for tomato sauces, recipes for jams and jellies, how to ferment safely, all kinds of things. So they will tell you just about anything you need to know. I love this site. It's very inspiring too, to look at it and think about what you can do, and then maybe go to the farmer's market. Kind of cool. I need recipes to enjoy winter vegetables. I really need this. So I think it's a great idea to collect winter veg recipes. So it could be fruit that's coming in now that we could use to preserve. It could be kale, how to make an amazing Caesar kale salad so that you can enjoy that, or a great squash lasagna, or please, it doesn't even have to be really specific. Like if you're telling how you braise kale, so it's pretty good, you can say hot sauce to taste. Salt it, apply the hot sauce before you put on the salt so you know how much salt to use. Or, braise a little, saute a little garlic. You don't have to say 2 garlic cloves, 1 pound of kale. I don't think. If you do have the quantities, you want to put them in there or estimate them, that would be fantastic. So if you would please participate in that, and I'd like you to think if you have any recipe right now, just think about it. I think that would be really cool, especially for kale, but also beets, anything you can think of that's a winter thing. You can send them to me, and it is in the chat right now. And if you in the future have any questions, you can also email me at that chat. Once I get the recipes together, then I will send out the link to the page. Can anybody think of a recipe that you could share? We will not hold it to you. You to it, I should say. Oh, Debbie, grilled small potatoes on rosemary skewers. Oh my gosh. Marinated in rosemary, garlic, olive oil. Oh my goodness, that sounds so great. Thank you for that. Anybody else have any ideas? Maria says kale, sweet potatoes, and walnuts. Oh, yum. That sounds delicious. Okay, if you would contribute those to, or a rough description of how you make them, to me, then I'll put them in the document, and then we can share it all. That works for you. Yay. Here's first of all, does anybody want to tell us more about storing food? Maybe I didn't cover something. I mean, I'm sure I didn't cover a dozen things. Nope. Okay. In October, we plan to have an in-person field trip to Kitsap Regional Library, where John Barut, master composter, will answer many questions about home composting and how to make it happen, and how to make it easier for yourself, and how to make it work more on your timeline. And does it have to be in the sun? No, it does not. Makes its own heat. So I am going to give you an update about this. If you'd like the update and the details about the day and time, because I do not know the date yet, would you please email me and tell me that you want to be on that list? If you're already getting emails from me, you don't need to do that, because if you're really getting directly from me, because I already have you on the list. And I think that's it. Yeah. That is the end. Bainbridge branch, Debbie, yes. Oh, John said it. Yeah, the Bainbridge branch. And there's my email. There you go. Well, thank you all for coming. That is all that I have planned for this evening.